Hi, I'm Shane.
And I'm Alex.
And this is RacePerMinute.
Thanks for joining us for our Barcelona Shakedown Roundup. I was trying to think of exactly how to describe it there because we're not supposed to call it a test, apparently. It is technically a shakedown. The wording, F1 wording police will be after me, I'm sure. It is basically the test before the test, but we get to see the cars on track. And I'm actually quite impressed at how much we have got to see. I was expecting it to be a lot more closed and for them to just do it and release some photos and maybe some social media activity. But no, it's been pretty... What we haven't got is basically live coverage. And we haven't got... there's like no sort of fans at the track. But otherwise, they've had the highlights videos. We've had, Sam Collins and Jolyon Palmer talking on the YouTube videos with, I think it's Philippa Ritchie who does it with me. I can't remember her name now.
Yes, yeah.
So she and them been talking about it as well. So we've got quite a decent amount of things to talk about and to sort of draw on what we've seen as well. And there's obviously some drama going on, not just in the world of F1, but in the world in general. So we're going to have to, and the two worlds have collided. I mean, they are sort of inseparable in this case. So no doubt we will touch on that as well. So let's start off nice and simple, Shane. We finally got to see these cars on track. We finally got to see them in the sunlight and in the sort of real life conditions. Do you feel any differently about any of the cars now that you've seen them in real life compared to the launches?
Well, they all look incredible, don't they? I don't know if it's because we've moved on from the 2021 season and that boxy look with that shine or gloss on them. But these cars, without a doubt, are some of the best looking Formula One cars we've had in a very long time, which is hard to say because actually some of the liveries haven't changed that much. But without a doubt, these are some of the best. If there's one which still bothers me a little bit is the McLaren. You mentioned it. I can't remember if it was on the podcast last week or whether it was just chatting and just me and you talking. It looks a little bit chalky. It's not as bright. It doesn't pop as much as I want it to. That orange just seems a little bit faded, unlike last year where it really popped. But apart from that, all these cars look great. The Mercedes have tidied up their pattern at the back as well. I noticed in the launch of the Mercedes and especially in their 100-kilometer run, what's it called? The filming day. All the Mercedes stars are a bit overlapped each other. Team Viewer was just plastered on top of it. It felt like they just layered different stickers to try and get the car ready. But actually, they've gone back and they've tidied it all up, and it does really looks like a proper silver hour now. It looks a lot more tidy. Everything just looks great, especially that Williams as well. Like it just looks so good. I mean, I could sit here and tell you how good they look for the next 20 minutes, but I'm not sure anyone would appreciate that. But I love the look of them. Obviously, the only one we haven't seen is the Alfa Romeo, but actually really like the look of that camo livery as well, especially when the drivers were wearing camo suits and Bottas at least was wearing a camo helmet. And I literally, we got the photo through on social media and I was like, I tell you what, that's good. They've done a good old job hiding what they want to hide because it's very hard to pick out what's car, what's helmet, what's driver's suit, especially when you're looking at it from a side angle. But let me throw the question back to you, Alex. What do you think about these cars? And is there one which stands out as one of the prettiest cars, or is there one which doesn't quite tickle you?
Well, starting with the maybe not so greats, I am sad to say that I'm still very unsure about this McLaren. Like you say, it's not really the colour for me. I quite like that bright sort of luminescent orange. It's just the design overall and the finish, like you say, there's that chalk-like texture. I feel like I could write my name on it, like dust would come off it if I put my finger in. Yeah, it just doesn't, something about it doesn't quite look it doesn't look very mean. It looks quite cartoony at some angles. I don't hate it, but I'm just a bit...
Don't love it.
I just don't feel any differently about it than I did when it was revealed, which was a bit sort of perplexed. And it's not a bad looking car, but it is quite an unusual looking car. So I'm not sure if I'll get used to it over the course of the season. To be honest, I don't care as much as long as it's fast. So seeing Lando top the timesheets on day one, I know it's only a test, but it's just a little sort of like...
It's only testing.
But at the very least, it's a reminder that there's something to be said, like they're solid in performance. Usually, you can't necessarily derive pace, but you can derive reliability and confidence to some degree. So that to me was just sort of a nice sort of like, okay, like we're ready to go here. Probably talk more about the bit later. So looking at the cars, if anything, a Ferrari looks even better.
Yes, it
for
does.
me, it's easily the smartest looking car on the track. I think it looks absolutely fabulous. And also that Mercedes as well. You already mentioned it. That when I saw it at the launch, I was a bit like, yes, it's sort of Silver Arrows Mercedes. They've gone for their iconic look. It looks good. But now I'll see it and I really like the look of it. It does look good the way they've changed the colours, the sort of more pronounced Petronas branded colours on the wing, for example. I really like that. The Alpine's not so bad. I think I prefer that livery they had last year. It would have been best if they could have kept it like that, really, but I'm sure the BWT sponsorship is important to them, so that's what's happened with that livery. It does feel a bit broken up, doesn't it?
With the Alpine, it feels like it's just two liveries kind of merged in together.
Yeah.
It's the Racing Point from last year.
It's like someone scratched away the sidebars and revealed the Force India underneath.
It's the Racing Point from a couple of years ago and the Alpine livery, and I can tell you what, when it gets to those first two races of the year and they're running the BWT livery solely, it's going to be a Racing Point. People have done a mistake for a Racing Point because, it was that
Perez
iconic...
in 2020. Oh, no.
He's back.
Sorry.
Oh, no, wait, it's not.
We've gone back in time.
It's people are going to get confused. It's going to take a while to get used to, but it's definitely an iconic look, isn't it? That pink livery. Everyone was like, whoa, it's pink. And then like, oh, yeah, it's Racing Point. This is pretty cool. And now it's going to be on the Alpine and Racing Point is no longer. And it's just, crazy times in Formula One.
But in summary, all the cars look really good. The new era makes the cars look lovely. So I think, visually we're in for a treat, and it's going to be a real special thing to see these cars go around the track and hopefully doing a bit more overtaking. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed indeed.
Right, shall I move on to my first or second? It'll be the second talking point now of the episode. And we've already talked about reliability and how it's been called a shakedown. I believe the general consensus was that this was a shakedown before preseason testing because new regulation, new set of rules, new everything. I think the teams and especially F1 media were worried that actually if they live broadcasted this shakedown, there'll be a lot of reliability issues. And it does none of these brands any favours when they're breaking down on the side of the track. Like the McLaren and Williams did do 4 or 5 years ago. It doesn't do them any favours. So I think that's why it was called it's why it's a closed session. It's why it's private, because actually they can get all these niggles out of the way until the actual preseason testing in 2 weeks' time. But the polar opposite has kind of happened because on the whole, the reliability has been very good to previous years. Yep, some teams have had issues, but like I said, on the whole, it's been okay. It's a shame that it wasn't broadcasted. What I find really strange is that the regulations have changed, yes, but the Aero regulations have changed the most. Actually, the engine regulations, they've been frozen. That's frozen this year. So the reliability, which you would have to say 95% of it comes from the engine. Again, you've got like suspension and gearbox issues as well. But 90% of the reliability comes from the engine. Well, these engines have already been tried and tested from last year. It's been frozen. It's exactly the same engine. So it's just a shame that it wasn't broadcasted live. But back to the reliability, I have got the combination of laps for each team over the 3 days. Now, shall I quickly run through them?
Yeah.
Or do you know these statistics? Or should we have a little game?
I've not got them written down, so you'll have to go for it.
Who do you think is at the top, off the top of your head?
Oh, done the most laps?
Done the most laps.
I'd probably say Ferrari have done quite a lot of laps.
Indeed, you are correct. So I'll just go from the top now. I'll through to the bottom really quickly. We've got Ferrari with 439 laps, followed by Mercedes with 393, McLaren with 367, Red Bull with 358, Williams with 347, which I think is a tremendous effort from that team, given it was only a couple of years ago they failed to turn up to the first day of testing due to various issues. AlphaTauri 308, Aston Martin with a shockingly low 296. I'm sure they would have wanted another 100 laps on top of that. Alpine with 266, and then this is where reliability. These teams have had a couple of issues over the last couple of days. We've got Alfa Romeo with 175 and then Haas with 160. So quite a field spread. Well, actually, you might not say that because actually the top 5 teams are all 300 and above, but then you've got the bottom 5 are just touching on 300 and then in the 200s and 100. So there it is. That's the total number of laps per manufacturer this year so far.
Yeah, I would have to go back and see how many laps had been done in previous tests to see how it compared. It's the sort of thing if I'd had a bit more time to prepare for this, but
Yes,
obviously
of course,
both of us have just come in from work and come in to make it happen. So I should have really sort of tried to figure this out. Maybe somebody can throw some figures at us in the comments or get in contact and see how it compares. I'm not quite sure.
This is the shakedown, Alex. This isn't the pre-season test. This is just the shakedown.
This is a test before a test that they're going to do even more laps before they actually get to drive them in any anger at all. Yeah, you're right. Like most of it obviously comes from the engine and how that goes, but I guess it's also been packaged very differently, which can cause issues. So whilst the regulations have changed, it's crazy. Some of the cars, they have the covers off and they take photos of them. It's so tightly packaged in.
Yes.
It's astonishing how they do it. It is a real marvel of engineering. And I guess that just causes issues when you have to package it a different way. So
especially with cooling as well, which then directly affects the engine and its performance. Yeah.
Yeah, so cooling and especially when some teams have brought very different cooling and quite sort of almost, very bold cooling decisions being made. It can all impact this. It can all impact that. So it's good to see that most cars in general have been good for reliability. I'm a little bit concerned, like you say, about those bottom two teams not getting many laps in. I don't want there to be a repeat where we have sort of teams miles behind. I don't think anyone really wants to see that. And also, Aston Martin, you mentioned, it's a kind of a repeat of last year's testing where they seem to suffer a lot with reliability. So hopefully it's not a repeat for them as well, because it puts us a bit of spanner in the works. Their car came out, everyone said, look at this design, this is really interesting. It seems to be very different to the Haas. It's got much wider side pods going back, etc. Possible that's caused some issues for them at the same time. So sometimes the boldest looking designs are impressive, but they can also cause more problems. And that's very true with Red Bull as well, who I'm going to talk about more a little bit later when we go over the Red Bull design. I
think, just to summarize, or just to finish off this whole reliability segment, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
It's really interesting this year how we've got the shakedown 2 weeks before pre-season testing. So actually these teams which have suffered these small gremlins like oil leaks or, water pressure leaks or just, these really small things. Because no one's had like a big issue. I know Alonso on day 3 had a bit of an issue with his car. I haven't actually read into that. Like you said, we've only just got home. But Haas and Alfa Romeo have had these small issues which have just hampered the car for the whole day. They've now got 2 whole weeks to fix this before pre-season testing. They get a second roll at the dice and they can then put all these issues aside and then try and get those 300-400 laps like the bigger teams has. Whereas in previous years, it's been back-to-back weeks of testing. Like, we're flying to a different country now to do pre-season testing. They'll be going home at the end of this week and, fixing their cars up and hopefully, getting rid of any issues. So I think it's cool. I quite like this whole shakedown thing. I mean, I wish it was broadcasted, but having a week and then a 2-week break and then another week gives these cars gives the engineers and the mechanics so much time to fix any gremlins so actually they don't present themselves at the early stages of the season.
Yeah, it seems that some kind of agreement has been made between the teams and the FIA and FOM and all the rest of it about, the new regulations and ensuring that there's been this extra shakedown. And it's obviously happening because it's of interest to those involved. So
yeah,
hopefully you are right and people are enjoying the fact that they get these opportunities, because I don't think anyone really likes it when race results are affected by just reliability issues. Like someone's having a certain day on the track and then suddenly their engine blows up, and it happens. It's part of the sport, but especially with regulations change as big as this, you don't want it to turn it into a farce, basically. You don't want it to really negatively affect the actual quality of the racing. So fair play for making that decision, really. Right, let's move on then.
Okay.
I hinted at it a moment ago. Let's talk about it now. Ooh. Let's talk about the Red Bull breaking cover and finally revealing what it looks like, because when they did their launch, of course, it was just a show car. We just saw a sort of livery launch, basically. So now we get to see what this Red Bull looks like, and it does have immediately quite unusual, very bold design as well, one that is also very different to everybody else's and is kind of, to me, it seems like the most extreme version of the undercut side pod style that there's on
definitely.
Like the AlphaTauri and the Alpine cars. Obviously, no idea how it will actually fare overall performance-wise, but what I do hope it's indicative of is more clarity in the changes on the cars with these regulations, because in previous seasons, what with having these big complicated barge boards and all little bits and parts all over the car, things change and it's not really obvious what has changed. You get these images posted on F1 of various technical people who spy these things in the paddock and go, oh, look, McLaren have put a little bit on the wing here that's a little bit longer than it was, and that will change the airflow. And it's sort of, you don't really see that. It's hard to be kind of excited about a tiny little bit being changed sometimes. Whereas here, the differences between the cars are so drastic that hopefully any development changes will be kind of make them look quite different as well. And it'll be exciting to see them evolve. So with the Red Bull here, you also have this sort of unusual shelf into the side pod inlets, which is quite unusual. Most places just an opening, but this seems to sort of scoop air into it somehow. It has obviously the slim undercut side pods. They're almost like wings. When you see it from the side and you see the top part, kind of, if you highlight that top part that's sitting above the undercut, it looks like a wing, like a sort of side, like a plane wing from the side. So it's an interesting design. And then the very considerable height of the nose as well. The front part of the car is much higher. I think it's higher than any other car. I think it's at the maximum height. So you look at it and it's a very particular beast compared to all the other cars on track. What did you make of this Red Bull design, Shane?
Well, we all knew it was going to be different from whatever they showed us, from the show car they showed us a week ago now. But how different, wow. I mean, it was something we hadn't really seen in any other car. I mean, some cars have got thin undercuts and quite tight packaging, but the Red Bull have taken it to another level. And I won't just repeat what you said, but what I particularly enjoy about the Red Bull is how much of the floor is exposed and how much you can see of what's going on in that floor. Because I think over the last couple of days, both Red Bull and Mercedes, and I'm sure other teams have as well, but they've brought in different floors and then you can compare them. It's so easy to compare them now because there's so much space. You can see so much, just even like a on-track shot exposes the floor so much because of that really tightly packaged side pod. And like you said, we'll be able to notice any changes going forward really easily. And I suppose other teams will as well because it's so deeply undercut. Whereas the Mercedes and the Aston Martins of the paddock, and I guess the McLarens, you've got that more traditional kind of side pod, which does undercut, but after a long time, like this is crazy. This is like another philosophy we didn't even mention during the car launches because obviously we didn't see it. But there's so many radical designs, and then Red Bull come out of this. I mean, could this be Adrian Newey's like another master plan, another genius design from, just the man himself? Who knows? But I tell you what, it looks like it means business. It looks quite mean as well. Like you said, I almost like describe them as like missile pods, or like a jet engine. That's how much they like bulge out and then tuck back in.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be all that settled at Red Bull though with this new design. It's possibly maybe causing some problems because they have had a few issues. They also had issues with their initial Silverstone shakedown because I think they didn't get onto the track on their filming day until much later in the day than they planned because they had a bunch of issues with the packaging, engine, etc. Jolyon Palmer on the F1 YouTube channel's own roundup of day 2 was saying that he thought the RB18 looked a bit out of sorts, that looked kind of lazy, like it was on high fuel all the time, which maybe they were. Maybe they were doing a lot of high fuel runs, but that was his, he's a former F1 driver, that was his assessment of it. So, and then we had first day, I think Max was in the gravel, and we've had Perez with the gearbox issue today, and the car's not been doing as much running as they would have liked. So it's, where are they on that list?
They're fourth from the top with 358 laps.
I mean, defending drivers champions team fourth in the list of laps is maybe, it's not bad, but it's maybe not what you would expect for them, especially going with such a bold design. They were probably trying to get as many laps as possible. So yeah, it's not all settled right now. We don't necessarily know if that has any real implications for the future, but it's not necessarily all settled. So bold decisions, but also you've got to take the responsibility of issues that can come with that, I guess.
especially when you compare the number of laps Red Bull did to Ferrari. There's like 80. I think it's like 79 laps difference. So I'm just trying to do quick maths.
Well over race distance.
81 laps difference. So like that's almost 2 Grand Prix in some tracks.
Well, in Spain, Spain is
50,
58?
Like 58 or 54.
Yeah, something
but
like
still,
that in Spain.
That's a whole Grand Prix extra Ferrari have done over Red Bull. So that's impressive stuff.
Yeah,
but
and
not
that can
if
really
you're Red
impact
Bull.
Development, can't it?
Oh, look at the amount of data they would have, achieved through just running that extra race simulation. It's crazy. So fair play to Ferrari, who's a good 40 ahead of their second place competitors as well, which is Mercedes. So Ferrari have really done quite well. Whereas Red Bull, you expect better from the reigning drivers' champions, like you said.
So Shane, what do you want to cover next? That's Red Bull.
Shall we talk about? Is it called porpoising?
Yeah, that's porpoising, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's back in Formula One. This is obviously this was a thing many years ago, way before I started watching Formula One, and if I'm being honest, probably before I was born as well. Yeah, so
1979 is when the term was coined. So
way before I was born.
We were born. Yeah.
Yeah, so listening to reports, it seems like the issue which impacted ground effect cars back in the 70s has now come back to haunt recent times. It happens when the downforce created by the Venturi vanes on the floor of the car is too strong, or the cars are going quite fast. Obviously, there's dragging in a lot more air. That the downforce is so strong, it sucks the floor of the car down to the track itself. And by doing that, it then removes any downforce generated. So then the car goes back up to its normal ride height. And over a certain speed, this continues to happen until the car drops below that speed in the next turn. And it's causing problems for a fair few teams, but the only team I've seen it actually on video is that Ferrari. We've seen Charles Leclerc down the main straight porpoising, but I've heard that it's happening with Mercedes, it's happening with Red Bull, it's happening with McLaren, because a lot of these cars are designed in the same way, especially when it comes to their ground effect and the vanes they're using, and the Venturi vanes they're using under the floor.
Where did you hear that it was affecting McLaren?
On the Autosport podcast.
Oh, okay.
So and they got boots on the ground. They got 5 members of the team there. So
because I was trying to see what team, I was trying to look up which teams it was affecting. I was looking for footage of it, and I've seen the Ferrari one. It's definitely
that's the only footage I've seen. Ferrari.
I've seen footage of it with there was some footage of it with Mercedes, I'm sure, and AlphaTauri as well.
Yeah, they definitely mentioned McLaren,
but I couldn't find any of McLaren. So I was like, oh, maybe it's something that's not affecting McLaren as much, but if boots on the ground are saying that they've seen it, then I guess that's
they're a pretty good podcast. They got 5 people there at trackside and then 5 people back at
they've been around a long time. You'd expect them to
have
be
70 years, but let's not go promoting other people's podcasts now. But they are great. You should definitely listen to them if you're a Formula One fan. But yes, it's impacting a fair few cars, and it's causing some stability issues, because you've got all the downforce you want, and then you've got no downforce at all, which is it's manageable on the straight. But when you start approaching high-speed corners, it's not so manageable, and then you want to be able to have the downforce, but you don't have it. So,
and it could damage the car. It can affect the driver's condition as well. So it's potentially a bit dangerous.
It's almost got like a safety question mark around it, and how teams are going to overcome this issue, because it isn't how the cars are meant to drive. What's your thoughts on the whole porpoising situation?
I think it will be obviously challenging to fix, because what you can do, I guess, is perhaps reduce the amount of downforce that's being achieved at high speed, so it doesn't kind of hit the floor. It doesn't reach that point at which it forces the car back up again. But then, of course, that just affects your performance. So you kind of have to make that compromise. And it may depend from team to team how much it affects the car, whether it does any damage to the suspension, how each individual driver handles it, and what effect it has on their sort of ride, as it were, their ability to focus when they're going into various corners. Yeah, it's a complicated one. I wouldn't obviously have any idea how to go about fixing it, so it's just one where you have to watch and see what happens to people. But it's I can't deny it's exciting that people are encountering that as a particular issue of the new regulations. It gives people a challenge, and when they are faced with these challenges, that's when people in Formula One tend to be the most innovative and tend to create new they rise to the technical challenge, and that's when exciting things happen. And I'm looking forward to seeing what teams come up with.
So the quick and easy solution for this, and a lot of teams have applied this in testing, is stiffen the suspension. Don't allow that much travel in the suspension, and then hopefully you'll reduce the porpoising. But the problem is with these 18-inch tyres, there's actually quite a bit of travel in the tyre itself vertically, under load and then not under load. So actually, the amount of downforce these cars are creating is bringing is tightening, or it's bringing that floor down to the ground, regardless of the suspension is tight or not. Because
that's the whole point of that's like the way that those cars work. Like that's the whole point. So,
but it's crazy to think that we've got this issue, and it will affect the speed. It will affect the cornering, and it's not going to be too bad for Bahrain, maybe with 1 or 2 straights. But when we go to Jeddah or Saudi Arabia, oh my goodness, we've got some seriously long straights on these tracks.
Even Bahrain. Bahrain's got 2 or 3 pretty big straights. So
it does, it does. But we've got some tracks here with a lot longer straights and a lot closer walls, which could cause some issues. But hopefully, this is a month away now, or just under a month away, actually.
Yeah,
the first Grand Prix, which is exciting. That these issues are ironed out and fixed before we go racing.
Right, we've saved it till the last, and I think that's a good idea.
I strategically let you lead with this one. Yeah, I jumped to my last one, which was porpoising, and I thought I'll let Alex lead with this.
Yeah,
so I apologise in advance.
It's a difficult one. I mean, I don't really want. It's a conversation that could easily sprawl, and we were talking about it just before we started recording because, of course, it involves. I'm very sad to say, war in Europe, which is, I mean, it's unthinkable to our generation because we've never experienced anything like that. I was born in 1991, so that's effectively the end of the Cold War. So it's very difficult for me to conceptualize it, and it's the whole thing is awful. And obviously, I don't want to sprawl into a conversation about that. But suffice to say that it's going to impact Formula One, so it has to come into the conversation here because it is an important talking point, and it's all been kicked off by Haas being seen removing the sponsorship for Uralkali from their sort of motorhomes and from the car, and they now essentially run a plain white livery, no flag, no nothing like that.
Which, incidentally, I think looks quite good. If you don't mind me saying, I quite like the whole plain white with black stripes. I suppose. Yeah, it does. Yeah.
I mean, the last time there was a plain white livery going around before Formula One, Jenson Button became world champion. So,
oh my goodness,
who knows? But yeah, it's. The future is a little uncertain for Haas, but it doesn't seem that the team themselves are necessarily under some great threat. So I don't think the story here is that we might see Haas out of F1 or anything like that. I don't get the impression that the story is quite that big. Certainly, Gunther Steiner, who gave a really quite actually useful and insightful interview with Sky Sports, he was obviously very quick to make it clear that the team was fine and would survive. And so there doesn't seem to be too much going on there. Now, at the moment, as far as I can tell, there are no specific sanctions against Mazepin, his father, Dmitry Mazepin, or Uralkali. So there are no specific sanctions against them that I'm aware of. And Gunther Steiner, again, in his interview, he said that he hasn't been contacted by any governments or anything like that prior to taking down the sponsorship. So he's not doing this on the orders of some external factor.
He's done it because it's right.
They've made this decision because, they obviously consider it the right thing to do, partially for, sort of optics reasons, if you like. It's a little crass to have the kind of Russian flag and to have this Russian large company when what is going on is going on. So they've obviously considered that to not be a good look. It's the right thing to do, but also because the relationship with Uralkali is called into question here, because if for whatever reason the commercial agreement ends, then that is also the end of Mazepin's time in Formula One, essentially, because the reason that he's in that seat is because of that sponsorship. And I think that Haas are going to want to get the best driver that they can. And, it has to be said that Mazepin is not exactly the best possible option available to them right now. So he's very lucky that he got the seat at all. Although I will stress that I absolutely despise the abuse that he's received in the past few days, and from some he's been receiving it in the entire time that he's been in the sport. it's not that criticism of the guy isn't justified, but it's that the vitriol of people hiding behind social media accounts achieves nothing and is little more than is just banality, basically. So it's a very, very complicated time for Haas. And like I say, it's potentially the end of Mazepin, the end of the Russian sponsor, and the end of the Russian Grand Prix as well.
Of course, yeah.
And I don't feel at all triumphant about that, but I do think that sadly it's a pain that Russia will have to feel because of the actions taken by their government.
I've always, like, we spoke before this podcast, before we started recording this podcast, and we like expressed how hard it is to talk about something like this, especially us being so young in our 20s, our late 20s and 30s. It's really dreadful, the situation which is happening. And I'm trying to keep it very Formula One related, because at the end of the day, this is a Formula One podcast. And yes, Nikita has his he has done some bad things in the past, and he's been criticized for them. But like you said, the last 24 hours across his social media accounts have been absolutely disgusting. This is a guy.
He's 22 years old, this guy.
He's 22 years old. And if he says the wrong thing, like, that's his life over. Like, he is in the stickiest situation you could possibly imagine. And you just got to read into the politics.
It's a bit of a zug-swang, isn't it? It's a zug-swang.
It's to the point where if he came out and said he doesn't agree with what's going on, his life would be at risk. But if he comes out and says he agrees with what's going on, which I don't think he ever would in any means necessary, like, the world would eat him up because of what's happening. Like, this guy, he can't say anything. And I think it's really good that he's been pulled out of all these press conferences, because you do not want to be putting a camera in front of his face. He's 22 years old. He is in the most difficult situation anyone will find in our lifetimes. Get the cameras out of his face. Stop asking him. I don't want anyone to ask him questions about this. Keep it with Gunther Steiner. Don't question anyone else at Haas until we know what's going on with their title sponsorship and with Mazepin's future, because it's such a terrible time, and he's obviously been caught up in it. And rightly or wrongly, I don't want to get into it, but it'll be a really sad way to leave the sport, because it's just terrible, isn't it? It's just, this whole situation is terrible, and I feel for everyone. And this is just shocking. And not to mention, Haas have had a right old problem with sponsorship in the last couple of years, and that roundabout has come round again. And here they are, even in a bigger problem, the biggest problem they've ever had in Formula One. And you think it got pretty bad with Rich Energy, but that was comical compared to this. This is something else. And I just really don't know how to summarize it, apart from just it's horrible what's going on. And I'm really sad it's going to impact Formula One and Mazepin himself.
Yeah, it's still very uncertain. But Mazepin himself, he's a Russian citizen, and there may be things involving visas and commercial agreements and all the rest of it that makes it impossible for him to continue. So we can't really say or do much else, and that's true of the situation as a whole, really, isn't it? I mean, you and I, we're fortunate enough to be bystanders in this, and so it's just it's going to impact the sport. And we just have to wait and see what happens. All credit to Haas for handling it the way that they have been. Like you say, I think they've been very professional, and they've done the right thing, and they've taken down those the sponsorship details. And I just hope that they can still compete, and that they find a way to...
seems pretty confident that this year will go ahead. The team will survive this year. Yeah, with the money they have.
Yeah, it's not like, it's not like the sport takes precedent or anything like that. Obviously, there are things more important than sport.
Yeah, of course.
So, but it's just a matter of within the context of the sport, you want to, you want people to be able to continue if they've put all the work into approaching the season. But if it comes down to it, then it comes down to it, and it will be a very, very minor element of a much, much greater tragedy ultimately. So all we can do is sit and watch. I'm sorry to say. Well, I mean, I hate to end the podcast on such a sort of dour note.
Maybe we should have
shouldn't
started the
done it.
podcast.
But I didn't want to start like that because then it would have been hard
No.
to continue. I mean, it's sad to have to put it as part of it because we do our best to keep the podcast quite lighthearted and
Yeah.
and sort of
This
fun
is as
and
probably as
relaxing to
serious as
listen
it
to,
gets.
so, yeah, but I mean, it would be absolutely crass for us to ignore it and pretend that it's not there and that it doesn't affect it and to treat it as some lighthearted thing because it's not. So yeah, on this instance, we'll have to leave you on a slightly more low down kind of note. But I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with the next test.
Yeah, in 2 weeks'
is
time.
2 weeks' time. So we'll go to Bahrain, see what happens there. People will rack up some more laps, and we'll find out.